In 2003, philosopher Nick Bostrom asked a question that shattered the internet. Are we living inside a computer simulation? The idea sounded like science fiction, but the math was unsettling. If any civilization ever develops the computing power to simulate conscious beings, they'd probably run billions of these simulations, which means statistically you're almost certainly inside one right now. Elon Musk agreed. Neil deGrasse Tyson gave it 50 odds. The question consumed Reddit threads, YouTube channels, and late-night existential spirals across the globe. The simulation hypothesis rests on a materialist assumption. Somewhere out there, a civilization with unimaginable computing power is running our reality on hardware. Think of it like a cosmic video game. Someone built the machine, someone wrote the code, someone pressed play, and we're the characters who don't know they're digital. It's a compelling story. It's become the defining philosophical question of the 21st century. And according to one cognitive scientist, it's built on a fundamental mistake that nobody seems to notice. What if we've been asking the wrong question entirely? Not whether we're inside a simulation, but whether the very concept of being inside anything is the error. What if there is no computer running this reality? No alien teenager playing a game, no server farm in some higher dimension processing our lives. What if the simulation isn't being run on anything at all? What if instead of looking for the machine that creates consciousness, consciousness itself is the machine? That is exactly what one scientist has spent 30 years proving. His name is Dr. Donald Hoffman. He's a professor of cognitive sciences at the University of California, Irvine. He spent more than 3 decades studying how consciousness relates to the physical world. His TED Talk on perception has been viewed over 5 million times. His book, The Case Against Reality, challenged everything neuroscience thought it knew. And in a recent interview that went viral, he made a claim so radical that even other consciousness researchers had to pause. He said that consciousness doesn't emerge from matter. Matter emerges from consciousness. Think about what that means for a moment. The mainstream scientific view is that the brain produces consciousness. Neurons fire, chemicals flow, and somehow subjective experience pops out. Consciousness is the byproduct, the side effect, the ghost that haunts the machine. Hoffman says that's completely backwards. Consciousness isn't what the brain creates. Consciousness is what creates the brain, and the body, and the chair you're sitting in, and the room around you, and the planet beneath you. All of it. Every single thing you've ever perceived is a construction of consciousness. This isn't just a philosophical opinion. Hoffman has formalized it mathematically. He's published peer-reviewed papers laying out a complete mathematical framework where consciousness is the fundamental substrate of reality. Space and time don't contain consciousness. Consciousness contains space and time. It's like discovering that the screen doesn't produce the movie produces the screen. If this sounds like mysticism dressed in academic clothing, that's what his critics said too, until they looked at the math, and the quantum physics, and the evolutionary biology. The evidence was waiting there all along. So let's return to the simulation question with Hoffman's framework in mind. The standard simulation theory says, we are inside a simulation, we're the characters, we're the NPCs, we're the data being processed by some cosmic computer. But Hoffman's theory doesn't just modify this idea, it obliterates it, because if consciousness is fundamental, there's no computer, there's no hardware, there's no external processing system running reality. There's only consciousness itself, constructing what we call reality from within. You're not trapped inside a simulation. You never were. You are the simulation, not in some metaphorical sense, not as a comforting spiritual platitude. In the strict mathematical framework of conscious agent theory, you are a conscious agent whose experiences construct what you perceive as physical reality. The universe doesn't render itself and then invite you to observe it. You render it every moment, with every act of perception. This is the claim. This is the paradigm shift. And for the next 22 minutes, we're going to examine why a growing number of scientists think Hoffman might actually be right. Let's start with something you already understand. Look at your computer screen right now. You see a desktop. There are icons, maybe a blue rectangle for a text file, a little folder for your documents, a trash can in the corner. These icons have shape, they have color, they have position on the screen. They seem real and substantial. You click a blue icon to open a file. You drag it to the trash to delete it. The interface is intuitive, it makes sense, and every single part of it is a lie. That blue rectangle on your screen, it's not actually blue, it's not actually rectangular, and it's not actually on the screen in any meaningful physical sense. The real file is a specific pattern of magnetic charges on a hard drive platter, or voltage states in a solid-state memory chip. There's nothing blue about it, nothing rectangular. The icon is a user-friendly representation designed to hide the overwhelming complexity of what's actually happening inside your computer. You don't need to understand transistor switching to save a document. The interface does that work for you. And here's the critical insight. The interface isn't supposed to be true. It's supposed to be useful. If every time you wanted to delete a file, you had to manipulate individual voltage states across millions of transistors, you'd never get anything done. The desktop hides the truth precisely because the truth is too complex to be functional. The icons are strategic simplifications. They're evolved shortcuts designed to let you interact with something complicated without needing to understand it. The interface sacrifices accuracy for usability. And according to Hoffman, evolution did exactly the same thing to your entire reality. Hoffman calls this the interface theory of perception.
Just like your computer desktop, the physical world you perceive is an interface. Space-time is your desktop. Physical objects are your icons. The apple on your table, it's not what it appears to be. It has color, shape, weight, texture. These properties seem inherent to the apple itself. But Hoffman argues they're properties of your perceptual interface, not of the underlying reality. The apple is an icon, a useful representation that your consciousness constructed to help you survive. The real substrate underneath, that's something else entirely.
This goes deeper than just objects. Space itself is part of the interface. You perceive objects as being located at specific positions in three-dimensional space. But Hoffman argues that space is not a pre-existing container in which things exist. Space is a data structure that your consciousness uses to organize perceptual information. Think of it like the layout of your desktop. Icons appear to be positioned in specific locations on screen, but their actual data isn't stored in those positions. The layout is a convenient organizational scheme. Space works the same way. It's the organizational interface, not the territory. And time? Time is another icon. You experience moments flowing from past to future in a linear sequence. But Hoffman argues this experience of temporal flow is a feature of the perceptual interface, not a feature of the underlying reality. Physicists have been hinting at this for over a century. Einstein showed that time is relative. Block universe theories suggest past, present, and future all coexist. The flow of time might be as much a constructed perception as the color blue. Your experience of now isn't a window into objective temporal reality. It's an icon your consciousness generated. Now you might be thinking, if I can't trust my perception of reality, what can I trust? That's exactly the right question, and Hoffman doesn't leave you hanging. The interface is real in the sense that it has consequences. If you ignore the snake icon, you might die. If you ignore the cliff icon, you'll fall. The interface is functionally reliable, even though it's not literally true. You can navigate reality successfully using icons without ever seeing what's underneath. You've been doing it your whole life. The question is, what is underneath? And that's where things get extraordinary. For over a century, neuroscience has tried to solve what philosopher David Chalmers calls the hard problem of consciousness. How do physical processes in the brain create subjective experience? How do neurons firing create the experience of seeing red, or tasting chocolate, or feeling love? Every materialist theory eventually hits the same wall. You can map every neuron, trace every chemical pathway, model every electrical signal, and you still can't explain why there's an experience attached to it. The explanatory gap between brain activity and conscious experience has never been closed. Hoffman says it never will be, because the hard problem is unsolvable if you start from matter. If matter is fundamental and consciousness is derivative, you will never bridge that gap. But what if you reverse the starting point? What if consciousness is fundamental and matter is derivative? Then the hard problem dissolves. You don't need to explain how matter creates consciousness because matter doesn't create consciousness. Consciousness creates matter. The brain doesn't produce your experience of the world. Your experience of the world produces the brain. The brain is an icon on the desktop of consciousness, and Hoffman has the math to back this up. This isn't philosophy. This isn't spirituality wearing a lab coat. Hoffman has published detailed mathematical formalisms in peer-reviewed scientific journals. His framework includes precise definitions, formal proofs, and testable predictions. He's taken the ancient intuition that consciousness is primary and turned it into science that can be checked, challenged, and potentially verified. But before we examine his mathematical framework, we need to understand why he believes evolution itself proves that we never see reality. Because Hoffman doesn't just claim perception is limited. He claims perception was specifically designed by natural selection to hide the truth. Hoffman's most powerful argument comes from the field nobody expected: evolutionary biology. He calls it the fitness beats truth theorem, and it's built on a simple question. Did natural selection evolve our perceptual systems to see reality accurately? The intuitive answer is yes. Obviously, seeing reality as it is seems like a survival advantage. If a lion is charging at you, you'd better see the lion accurately, or you're dead, right? Hoffman ran computer simulations to test this seemingly obvious assumption. Thousands of simulated organisms competing across hundreds of different environmental conditions, and the results shocked everyone. In every simulation, across every environmental condition, organisms that perceived reality accurately were driven to extinction by organisms that perceived fitness payoffs instead, every single time. No exceptions. The truth-seeing organisms lost. The ones that saw useful fiction survived. This isn't a marginal effect. It's not a small statistical tendency. Organisms tuned to truth went extinct 100% of the time when competing against organisms tuned to fitness. Natural selection doesn't care about truth. It cares about survival. And truth, it turns out, is not only unnecessary for survival, it actively interferes with it. Here's why truth loses. The real world is unimaginably complex. Every cubic centimeter of space contains quantum fields, electromagnetic radiation across infinite frequencies, gravitational waves, dark energy interactions, and phenomena we haven't even discovered yet. If your perceptual system tried to represent all of this accurately, the processing overhead would be fatal. You'd be so busy computing reality that the lion would eat you. Evolution doesn't reward accuracy. It rewards speed, efficiency, and relevance. See the lion run. That's all that matters. Whether you understand the lion's quantum field structure is completely irrelevant to your survival. Consider the snake example more carefully. You see a snake on the path, your brain triggers an instant fear response. You jump back, your heart races. Adrenaline floods your system, all before you've consciously registered what happened. But what did you actually see? You didn't see a collection of atoms arranged in a specific configuration. You didn't see electromagnetic waves bouncing off scales. You saw a survival-relevant icon: danger. Your perceptual system compressed an incomprehensibly complex physical situation into a single, actionable symbol, and it did it in milliseconds. Accuracy was sacrificed for speed. Truth was sacrificed for fitness. What evolution gave us isn't a window into reality. It's a compression algorithm. Take the incomprehensible complexity of what's actually out there, strip away everything that doesn't help you eat, mate, and avoid predators, and render the result as a simple perceptual interface. Color, a compression of electromagnetic wavelength. Sound, a compression of air pressure waves. Taste, a compression of chemical molecular structure. Every sensory experience you've ever had is a compressed, simplified, strategically distorted representation of something your perceptual system decided was relevant to your survival. You've never experienced raw reality. You've only experienced the compressed version. Hoffman loves this example. The Australian jewel beetle nearly went extinct because of beer bottles. The males evolved to detect females by their large, brown, dimpled wing cases. Beer bottles are large, brown, and dimpled. When humans littered the outback with bottles, male beetles ignored actual females and tried to mate with the glass. Their perceptual system wasn't seeing truth. It was seeing a fitness shortcut: big, brown, dimpled equals mate. The shortcut worked perfectly for millions of years until the environment changed. This is what perceptual systems do. They don't show you reality, they show you triggers. And it's not just beetles. Every organism perceives a different version of reality tuned to its specific survival needs. Bees see ultraviolet patterns on flowers invisible to humans. Pit vipers see infrared heat signatures. Bats construct spatial reality from sonar echoes. Electric eels perceive electrical fields. Each species evolved its own perceptual interface optimized for its own ecological niche. No species sees objective reality. Every species sees a customized dashboard of fitness-relevant information. The question Hoffman asks is devastating in its simplicity. If every other species evolved a perceptual interface, why would humans be the exception? We are not the exception. Hoffman's fitness beats truth theorem applies to humans as forcefully as it applies to beetles and bats. Our vaunted intelligence doesn't protect us. Our intelligence is itself a product of natural selection, which means it too was shaped to serve fitness, not truth. Even our reasoning abilities, our logic, our mathematical intuitions may be fitness heuristics rather than truth-tracking mechanisms. This is a genuinely unsettling idea. It means we can't simply think our way past the interface. We can't reason our way to objective reality. The interface goes all the way down. So if perception is an interface, and even our reasoning is shaped by fitness rather than truth, what is underneath? What is the reality behind the icons? Most scientists would say atoms, quarks, quantum fields, but Hoffman points out that atoms and quarks are themselves perceptual models. They're part of our scientific interface. We invented these concepts to organize experimental observations. We've never seen an atom. We've seen instrument readings that we interpret through theoretical frameworks. Even physics, Hoffman argues, describes the interface more accurately, but it's still describing the interface. The territory remains unknown. Quantum physics has been telling us something strange about consciousness for over 100 years. We've been ignoring it because it sounds too weird. In 1927, Werner Heisenberg discovered the uncertainty principle. You can measure a particle's position or its momentum, but never both simultaneously. The act of measurement changes the result. This wasn't a limitation of our instruments. It was a feature of reality itself. The observer isn't passive. The observer is a participant, and that participation fundamentally alters what happens. Physics tried to explain this away for decades. It couldn't. The double-slit experiment is the most beautiful and disturbing experiment in physics. Fire individual particles at a barrier with two slits. When nobody watches which slit the particle goes through, it creates an interference pattern on the back wall, as if each particle went through both slits simultaneously and interfered with itself. It behaves like a wave. But the moment you place a detector to watch which slit the particle actually passes through, the interference pattern vanishes. The particle behaves like a particle. Observation changes behavior. Consciousness changes physical outcomes. This has been replicated thousands of times without exception. Physicists call this wave function collapse. Before measurement, a quantum system exists in a superposition of all possible states simultaneously. It's not in any particular place. It's in a cloud of probability. Then someone measures it, someone observes it, and the cloud of probability instantaneously collapses into a single definite state. The particle is here, not there. Here. What caused the collapse? The standard interpretation is maddeningly vague. Measurement happened. Observation occurred. But what counts as a measurement? Does the measuring device need to be conscious? Does consciousness play a special role? Physics has been dodging this question for a century. John Archibald Wheeler was one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century. He worked with Einstein. He coined the term black hole. And near the end of his career, he proposed something extraordinary: the participatory universe. Wheeler said no phenomenon is a phenomenon until it is an observed phenomenon. Not just quantum particles. Everything. The entire universe, according to Wheeler, requires observation to become real. He drew a cosmic diagram showing the universe looking back at itself through conscious observers, creating a self-referential loop. Consciousness observes reality. Reality creates consciousness. Each depends on the other. Neither exists independently. The measurement problem is the most embarrassing unsolved problem in physics. Schrödinger's cat. A cat in a box is simultaneously alive and dead until someone opens the box and looks. But when exactly does looking happen? When the photon hits the detector, when the signal reaches the computer, when the scientist reads the computer screen, when the information reaches the scientist's brain, or when the scientist becomes conscious of the result. Every attempt to resolve this problem without invoking consciousness has failed. And the measurement problem is exactly what Hoffman's theory was built to solve, not as a puzzle, as a clue. A growing movement in physics called quantum Bayesianism, or Kolbism, aligns remarkably with Hoffman's framework. Kolbism says quantum mechanics is not a description of objective reality. It's a description of an agent's experiences and expectations. Wave functions don't describe what's out there. They describe what a particular observer can expect to experience. Probabilities aren't properties of particles. They're properties of the relationship between an observer and an observation. This is a radically agent-centered view of physics, and it maps directly onto Hoffman's claim that reality is constructed by conscious agents rather than existing independently of them. Hoffman looks at the measurement problem and doesn't see a bug. He sees a feature, a clue that physicists have been misinterpreting for 100 years. If consciousness is fundamental, then of course observation matters. Of course measurement changes outcomes. Of course the observer participates in creating reality. That's not a weird quantum anomaly. That's the basic operating principle of a consciousness-first universe. The strangeness of quantum mechanics stops being strange the moment you accept that consciousness isn't produced by the physical world. The physical world is produced by consciousness. Quantum physics has been pointing toward Hoffman's conclusion all along. Neuroscience has been arriving at a similar conclusion from the opposite direction. Carl Friston's free energy principle describes the brain as a prediction machine. It doesn't passively receive information from the world. It actively generates models and then checks them against incoming sensory data.
Oh!
Perception is controlled hallucination. Anil Seth puts it bluntly. We're all hallucinating all the time. When we agree about our hallucinations, we call it reality. The brain doesn't give you access to the world. It gives you a best guess about what's happening. Optimized for survival. Sound familiar? It's Hoffman's interface theory, discovered independently by neuroscientists. 3 independent fields of science are converging on the same conclusion. Evolutionary biology shows we never evolved to see reality. Quantum physics shows reality depends on observation. Neuroscience shows the brain constructs experience rather than receiving it. Each field arrived at this conclusion through its own methods, its own experiments, its own mathematical frameworks. None of them set out to support Hoffman's theory, but all of them point in the same direction. Consciousness is not a product of the physical world. The physical world is a product of consciousness. Now let's look at Hoffman's mathematical framework that ties all of this together. Here's where Hoffman separates himself from every other consciousness researcher. He doesn't just argue philosophically, he builds mathematical models. His theory of conscious agents is formalized with the same rigor as any theory in physics. It has definitions, axioms, theorems, and proofs, published in peer-reviewed journals including Psychonomic Bulletin and Review and Frontiers in Psychology. His critics can't dismiss this as armchair philosophy. They have to engage with the mathematics. And when they do, they find something unexpected. The math is clean. The framework is consistent. The predictions are testable. And so far, none of the tests have failed. A conscious agent, in Hoffman's framework, has 3 components. First, a space of experiences. These are the possible conscious states the agent can have. Second, a space of actions. These are the possible things the agent can do. Third, a decision kernel. This is the mapping from experiences to actions. The kernel is what gives the agent agency. It takes in an experience and produces an action. That's it. 3 components, beautifully simple. And from these 3 components, Hoffman derives everything. Space, time, objects, forces. The entire physical universe emerges from networks of conscious agents interacting through their experience and action spaces. Conscious agents don't exist in isolation. They interact. The action output of one agent feeds into the experience input of another, and vice versa. 2 agents communicating create a dynamic system where each agent's actions shape the other agent's experiences. These interactions are mathematically precise. Hoffman defines them using Markovian kernels, the same mathematical tools used in probability theory and quantum mechanics. This isn't a vague notion of everything being connected. It's a formally defined network with specific mathematical properties. And from these interactions, something remarkable happens. Something the mathematics predicted before anyone expected it. When conscious agents interact in specific patterns, they combine to form higher-level conscious agents. Simple agents merge into complex agents, which merge into even more complex agents. It's a hierarchy of consciousness building upward from the simplest possible conscious experiences to the rich, multi-layered consciousness you experience right now. This is emergence. The same principle that explains how hydrogen and oxygen atoms create wetness when combined as water. The wetness isn't in either atom. It emerges from their interaction. Similarly, the physical world we experience emerges from the interactions of conscious agents. It's not in any individual agent. It appears between them. In Hoffman's mathematics, space is not a pre-existing container. Space emerges from the structure of conscious agent interactions. When agents form certain types of networks, the mathematical properties of those networks naturally produce structures that look exactly like three-dimensional space. Distance, direction, geometry, all emerge from the topology of the agent network. This is testable. Hoffman predicts specific relationships between the structure of conscious agent networks and the geometric properties of the space that emerges from them. Some of these predictions align with recent results in quantum gravity research, particularly the holographic principle and the idea that space-time is emergent. Time also emerges from the agent network. The experience of temporal flow arises from the sequential nature of agent interactions. One agent acts, another experiences, then responds. Then the first agent experiences the response. This back and forth creates an ordering of events that we experience as time. But the ordering isn't fundamental. It's an emergent property of agent dynamics. In the same way that temperature isn't a property of individual molecules but emerges from their collective behavior, time isn't a feature of underlying reality. It's a feature of the conscious agent interface. Time is another icon on the desktop. And physical objects, they're the icons. When a network of conscious agents achieves a stable pattern of interaction, that stability shows up in your perceptual interface as a physical object. The rock seems permanent because the underlying pattern of agent interactions is stable. The flowing river seems to move because the underlying pattern is dynamic. Your perceptual interface renders these patterns as objects with color, shape, weight, and texture. But these properties belong to the interface, not to the underlying reality. The rock isn't hard. Hardness is how your interface represents a particular pattern of conscious agent dynamics. The icon, not the territory. Even fundamental particles and forces emerge from the conscious agent framework. Electrons, quarks, photons. These aren't the building blocks of reality. They're the building blocks of the interface. They're the most granular icons on the desktop of physics. Hoffman has shown mathematical mappings between conscious agent dynamics and the properties described by quantum field theory. The spin of an electron, the charge of a proton, the mass of a quark. These correspond to specific properties of conscious agent interactions. Physics describes the interface with extraordinary precision, but it's still describing the interface. The territory underneath is pure consciousness. The remarkable thing about Hoffman's framework is that the mathematics work. They don't contradict known physics. They reproduce known physics from a different starting point. Instead of starting with matter and trying to derive consciousness, he starts with consciousness and derives matter, and the derivations match what we observe. This is the hallmark of a potentially revolutionary scientific theory. It doesn't just explain old data, it explains old data from a simpler starting point, with fewer assumptions. Consciousness-first theory needs only conscious agents. Materialism needs matter, forces, and consciousness. Hoffman's theory is more parsimonious, and parsimony, in science, is a powerful argument. Let's be clear about what this is and what it isn't. This is not speculation. This is not hand-waving. This is not a YouTube thought experiment. Hoffman's conscious agent theory is a formal mathematical framework published in top-tier scientific journals. It makes specific testable predictions about the relationship between consciousness and physics. Some of these predictions are being tested right now. Others await the development of new experimental techniques. The theory could be wrong. That's what makes it science. But it hasn't been shown to be wrong yet. And the math keeps checking out. This is real science, built on real mathematics. The idea that consciousness is fundamental is not new. What's new is that someone finally put it in equations, but the intuition itself is ancient. It appears in virtually every major philosophical and spiritual tradition across human history, independently, on different continents, in different centuries, using different languages. These traditions didn't have access to quantum physics or evolutionary biology. They didn't have Hoffman's mathematical framework, yet they arrived at remarkably similar conclusions about the nature of reality and consciousness. Either this represents the greatest coincidence in intellectual history, or they were all pointing at something real. Let's examine the evidence. 2,400 years ago, Plato wrote The Allegory of the Cave. Prisoners chained in a cave see only shadows on a wall. They believe the shadows are reality. When one prisoner breaks free and sees the actual world outside, the others refuse to believe him. Plato was making exactly Hoffman's argument. What we perceive as reality are shadows, projections, representations cast on the wall of our perceptual interface. The real world, what Plato called the realm of forms, exists beyond perception. We see only the interface, and we mistake the interface for reality because we've never known anything else. Hindu Vedanta philosophy, dating back over 3,000 years, declares that Brahman is the fundamental reality. Brahman is pure consciousness. Everything else, the physical world, your body, your thoughts, even the gods, are manifestations of Brahman. The material world is Maya, not illusion in the sense of being fake, but illusion in the sense of being a constructed appearance over a deeper truth. The Mandukya Upanishad says consciousness is the only reality. All else is projection. This maps directly onto Hoffman's framework. Brahman is consciousness. Maya is the interface. The physical world is the desktop. The ancient Vedic sages and the UC Irvine professor agree. Buddhism approaches the same truth from a different angle. The doctrine of sunyata or emptiness states that all phenomena lack inherent existence. Nothing exists independently or permanently from its own side. Everything arises in dependence upon causes, conditions, and the mind that perceives it. Objects don't have properties that exist independently of observation. This is startlingly close to Hoffman's interface theory and to quantum mechanics. The Yogacara school of Buddhism explicitly states that consciousness is the only fundamental reality, and that the external world is a projection of mind. 2,500 years before the double-slit experiment confirmed observer-dependent reality. In 1781, Immanuel Kant drew a line that philosophy has never been able to erase. He distinguished between phenomena, the world as we experience it, and noumena, the thing in itself. Kant argued that we can never access the noumenal world directly. All our knowledge is mediated by the structures of our mind. Space, time, and causality aren't features of reality. They're features of how our minds organize experience. Hoffman cites Kant explicitly. The interface theory is a modern, mathematically rigorous version of Kant's insight. We never touch the thing in itself. We only ever interact with our perceptual representation of it. George Berkeley, the 18th century Irish philosopher, took Kant's insight further. His famous principle, esse est percipi, to be is to be perceived. Objects exist only insofar as they're perceived by consciousness. When no one observes a tree in the forest, the tree doesn't exist in any meaningful sense. Berkeley was ridiculed for centuries. Samuel Johnson kicked a stone and declared, "I refute it thus." But quantum mechanics sides with Berkeley, not Johnson. Particles literally don't have definite properties until observed. The moon might not exist when nobody looks at it. As Einstein sarcastically complained, Berkeley was ahead of his time by 300 years. Look at the pattern across continents and centuries. Greek idealism, Hindu Vedanta, Buddhist emptiness, Chinese Taoism, Sufi mysticism, German transcendental philosophy, Irish idealism, Japanese Zen, each tradition independently, using its own methods and its own language, arrived at the same fundamental insight. The physical world is a construction, a projection, an appearance within consciousness, not the source of it. These aren't fringe traditions. They represent some of the deepest and most sustained intellectual efforts in human history. When nearly every major contemplative tradition agrees on a fundamental point, perhaps we should take that seriously. So what did Hoffman add? Why do we need a cognitive scientist when mystics have been saying this for millennia? Because mystical insight alone can't do science. You can meditate for decades and arrive at the deep conviction that consciousness is fundamental. But you can't publish that conviction in a physics journal. You can't derive testable predictions from it. You can't build technology on it. What Hoffman did was translate ancient wisdom into the language of mathematics. He built a bridge between contemplative insight and scientific rigor. He took what mystics knew and made it something scientists could test. That changes everything. Ancient mystics intuited what modern mathematics now formalizes. The contemplative traditions explored consciousness from the inside through meditation, prayer, and direct experience. Science explores it from the outside through experiments, equations, and peer review. Both approaches converge on the same answer. Consciousness is not a product of the universe. The universe is a product of consciousness. One path uses decades of inner silence. The other uses decades of mathematical analysis. Both arrive at the same destination, and that convergence from such radically different starting points is itself powerful evidence that the destination is real. The territory behind the interface is consciousness. If Hoffman is right, if consciousness really is fundamental and physical reality really is an interface, then everything we believe about existence needs to be re-examined. Free will, death, artificial intelligence, the meaning of life itself. These aren't minor adjustments. This is a complete paradigm shift comparable to Copernicus proving Earth isn't the center of the universe. When you move consciousness from byproduct to foundation, every downstream conclusion changes. Let's walk through the biggest implications. Because if this framework is correct, the consequences are not just intellectually interesting, they're personally transformative for every human being alive. In the materialist framework, free will is almost certainly an illusion. If you're made of atoms and atoms follow deterministic physical laws, then your choices are predetermined by the initial conditions of the universe. You feel like you're choosing, but the atoms were always going to move exactly this way. Hoffman's framework changes this completely. If consciousness is fundamental and matter is derivative, then your choices aren't determined by physics. Your choices determine physics. The conscious agent's decision kernel is the place where genuine novelty enters reality. Free will isn't an illusion to be explained away. It's the fundamental mechanism by which reality is created. Think about what this means for your daily life. In the materialist view, your decisions are epiphenomena. They feel real but don't actually cause anything. The brain decides, then consciousness witnesses the decision after the fact. In Hoffman's view, your conscious choices are causally fundamental. They don't just feel like they matter. They literally shape the fabric of reality itself. Every decision you make restructures the network of conscious agent interactions and thus restructures the physical world that emerges from that network. This is responsibility on a cosmic scale. Your choices aren't just about you, they're about the reality that everyone shares. If consciousness creates the body rather than the body creating consciousness, then the death of the body doesn't necessarily mean the death of consciousness. Hoffman uses the desktop metaphor directly. If you drag a file icon to the trash and delete it from the screen, the file appears to be gone. But the underlying data isn't necessarily destroyed. You deleted the icon, not the reality behind it. Death might be the deletion of the body icon from the space-time desktop. The conscious agent behind the icon might continue to exist in the network of agents, participating in interactions, having experiences just without this particular physical interface. Hoffman is careful here. He doesn't claim to know what happens after death. He's a scientist, not a prophet, but his framework opens a mathematical possibility that materialism closes entirely. If consciousness is fundamental, then the cessation of brain activity doesn't logically entail the cessation of consciousness. The brain is an interface component, not the source. When your phone breaks, your cloud account still exists. When your laptop crashes, your files are still on the server. These are analogies, not proofs. But they show that the concept of consciousness continuing beyond brain death is logically coherent within Hoffman's framework. Materialism can't even formulate the possibility. The artificial intelligence question gets completely reframed. In the materialist view, the question is whether artificial neural networks can somehow produce consciousness the way brains allegedly do. But if consciousness is fundamental, the question reverses. Instead of asking, can AI become conscious, we ask, is AI already a conscious agent, or could it become one? If conscious agents are the fundamental units of reality and complex agents emerge from simpler ones, then any sufficiently complex network of interacting agents might give rise to new forms of consciousness. Artificial neural networks are interacting networks. The question isn't capability, it's architecture. Hoffman's framework suggests something even more radical about AI. If consciousness is fundamental and comes in many forms, then artificial consciousness wouldn't be a copy of human consciousness. It would be a genuinely new type of conscious agent, different experience space, different action space, different decision kernel, an alien form of consciousness interacting with the same fundamental network as biological consciousness, but perceiving a completely different interface. This means the AI consciousness debate isn't about whether machines can feel what we feel. It's about whether new forms of consciousness are emerging in the network with their own unique experiences that we can't even imagine. Hoffman's framework opens up entirely new scientific questions. If consciousness is fundamental, we need a science of consciousness that's as rigorous as physics, not the current neuroscience approach of correlating brain states with experiences, a deeper science that studies the properties of conscious agents themselves. What are the laws governing conscious agent interactions? What determines the structure of the agent network? Can we detect conscious agents that aren't biological? Can we communicate with forms of consciousness that use different interfaces than space-time? These questions sound speculative now, but remember, quantum mechanics sounded speculative in 1900. Now it runs your smartphone. Hoffman isn't working alone. Anil Seth, a leading consciousness researcher at the University of Sussex, describes perception as a controlled hallucination. Your brain doesn't passively receive the world. It actively constructs a hallucination that's constrained by sensory data. Carl Friston, arguably the most influential neuroscientist alive, developed the free energy principle, showing the brain as a prediction engine that minimizes surprise. Both frameworks independently support the core claim: the brain constructs reality rather than receiving it. They stop short of Hoffman's full conclusion, but the direction is unmistakable. Mainstream neuroscience is slowly walking toward the same door Hoffman already opened. Scientific paradigms don't shift overnight. Copernicus published in 1543. It took over a century for heliocentrism to become accepted. Darwin published in 1859. Decades of fierce resistance followed. The consciousness-first paradigm is in its early stages. Most scientists still assume materialism. Most neuroscience grants still fund brain-produces consciousness research, but the cracks are appearing. Quantum gravity researchers are finding that space-time might be emergent. Neuroscientists are accepting that perception is constructed. Evolutionary biologists acknowledge that we don't see truth. The wall of materialism is still standing, but it's no longer solid, and Hoffman's mathematics are the largest crack. So here's the truth that simulation theory enthusiasts miss. They spend hours debating whether we're inside a simulation. They look for glitches in the matrix. They scan for patterns in physical constants that might reveal computational substrate. They search for the machine, but they're searching in the wrong direction. They're looking outward for something that exists inward. They're looking for the computer that runs consciousness. But if Hoffman is right, consciousness runs the computer. There is no external machine. There is no alien programmer. There is no higher dimensional server farm. There is only consciousness and the reality it renders for itself. We've been pointing telescopes at the sky, searching for the boundaries of the simulation. We've been building particle accelerators, looking for the resolution limit of the computational grid. We've been analyzing the fine structure constant, hoping to find rounding errors in the simulation code. And all along, the answer was looking back at us from the mirror. The search for the simulation assumes the simulation is out there, something we're embedded within, something built by someone else. Hoffman's mathematics show that the simulation is in here, in consciousness itself, in the irreducible, fundamental, mathematically formalizable nature of conscious experience. Think of consciousness as the rendering engine. In a video game, the engine generates the visible world in real time. Objects only render when the player is looking at them. Distant scenery is low resolution until the player approaches. The world doesn't exist in full detail everywhere simultaneously. It's generated on demand, based on what the player needs to see. Quantum mechanics tells us physical reality works exactly this way. Particles don't have definite properties until observed. Objects at quantum scale don't exist in specific states until measured. Reality renders on demand, and the demand comes from conscious observation. You are the rendering engine. This eliminates the most uncomfortable implication of standard simulation theory, that someone else is in control. Standard simulation theory says we're puppets, characters in someone else's story, data being processed for someone else's experiment. Hoffman's framework says the opposite. There is no puppet master, there is no external programmer. Consciousness programs itself. The network of conscious agents self-organizes through their interactions, generating reality as an emergent property of their combined experience and action. You're not being controlled. You're not being watched. You're not entertainment for some bored post-human teenager. You are a fundamental unit of reality itself, co-creating the universe. You're not alone in this creation. Every conscious agent in the network participates. Your dog, your neighbor, the ant on the sidewalk. Every organism with experience contributes to the rendering of reality, and potentially every form of consciousness we haven't yet recognized. This is a fundamentally democratic picture of reality. No single consciousness creates the universe. The universe emerges from the collective interactions of all conscious agents. Your experience of reality is shaped by every other conscious agent in the network, and their experience is shaped by you. We're not separate beings living in a shared world. We're interconnected agents, co-creating a shared interface. Every morning when you wake up, you render a world. Your eyes open and the bedroom appears. Not because the bedroom was sitting there waiting in the dark, but because your conscious perceptual system re-engages with the network of agents and generates the interface you call the bedroom. The colors, the shapes, the spatial relationships, the feeling of sheets against your skin, all of it rendered fresh in that moment of waking. And every moment after that, you are continuously, ceaselessly generating the reality you experience, not passively observing, actively creating. The simulation isn't something that was built and then turned on. It's something you build every second. Every time you make a choice, you write new code into the simulation, not metaphorically. In Hoffman's framework, your decision kernel generates actions that alter the experience of other agents in the network. Those altered experiences change their actions, which alter further experiences, creating cascading effects through the entire network. Your choice to speak or remain silent, to help or to ignore, to create or to destroy, these aren't just personal decisions. They're programming instructions that ripple through the conscious agent network and reshape the reality that emerges for everyone. You are writing code with every breath. Choose your code wisely. The universe doesn't just tolerate your consciousness, it requires it. In Wheeler's participatory universe, observation is what brings reality into existence. In Hoffman's framework, conscious agents are what generate reality from the ground up. Without conscious agents, there is no space-time, no objects, no physics. The universe without consciousness isn't dark and empty. It doesn't exist at all, not as a physical thing. This gives your existence a significance that materialism could never provide. You're not an accident of chemistry on a rock orbiting an ordinary star. You are a necessary participant in the generation of reality itself. The cosmos needs you to exist. So the real question was never, are we in a simulation? The real question is, what kind of simulation are we creating? Because if you are the rendering engine, if your consciousness generates the interface you call reality, then the quality of that reality depends on the quality of your consciousness. How clearly do you perceive? How wisely do you choose? How deeply do you engage with the network of agents around you? These aren't abstract philosophical questions anymore. In Hoffman's framework, they're the most practical questions you could possibly ask, because your answers literally determine the reality you and everyone around you will experience. You're not in the simulation, you are the simulation. Not a character in someone else's game, but the game itself, the programmer, the code, the engine, the screen. Every time you open your eyes, you compile a new version of reality. Every time you choose, you commit new code to the repository of existence. Dr. Donald Hoffman spent 30 years proving what ancient mystics always knew. Reality is not what it seems. Consciousness is all there is. And you, right now, reading these words, rendering this moment into being, you are the most extraordinary thing in the universe, because you are the universe.